The air was already heavy before the scandal broke. Months of speeches, rallies, and televised debates had left the country simmering in political fatigue. Commentators filled screens with the same recycled arguments, party loyalists shouted across the aisles, and the average citizen, tired of promises that felt hollow, simply wanted silence. Yet silence is a fragile thing in politics, and it rarely lasts. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was waiting to drop a match into the dry kindling. The stage for upheaval was set by tension. Poll numbers wavered week by week, hinting at a razor-thin margin that terrified strategists. Behind the podium, smiles and choreographed handshakes, suspicion brewed. Advisors whispered that opposition forces weren't just debating anymore, they were digging. Every private conversation, every careless laugh at a dinner table, every late-night call could become a weapon. Into this climate of paranoia, a journalist received an anonymous message. The subject line was unremarkable, almost careless, "Thought you'd like this." Attached was a single audio file, compressed and grainy, but unmistakably authentic. The reporter clicked play, and what spilled from the speakers was not the polished rhetoric of press conferences, but the raw, unfiltered voice of a figure who held national influence. Muffled at first, the words grew sharper, more charged, until the weight of what was being said was undeniable. It was the kind of recording that needed no spin. No dramatic headline could exaggerate its implications. The power of it lay in its simplicity, the sudden crack in a carefully built facade. A politician who had always insisted on one set of values seemed to be mocking them in private. It was a revelation not of crime, but of character, and that alone was enough to shake the ground. By dawn, the audio had traveled further than its source could have imagined. Shared first among a handful of journalists, then whispered between insiders, it was only a matter of hours before the clip escaped into the bloodstream of the internet. At first, small accounts posted it, almost uncertain whether to believe what they were hearing. But disbelief quickly gave way to fury, and fury spreads faster than any headline. The public didn't hear this as a debate point. They heard betrayal. The voice in the recording wasn't delivering a speech to an audience, it was relaxed, candid, almost smug. That made it worse. To critics, it confirmed everything they had suspected. To supporters, it felt like being blindsided by someone they had defended for years. The recording was more than words. It was a mirror, forcing the nation to confront the gap between image and reality. And as the morning sun hit the Capitol, one truth became clear: this was not going to vanish. The story had momentum now, and nothing could stop it from tearing through the fragile calm of political life. The courthouse in Alexandria had never seen a morning like this. Reporters jammed the steps, microphones waving in the air like a forest of steel, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of questions. Everyone wanted the same answer. Why was Jasmine Crockett, a rising star in Congress, being summoned on an emergency motion for donor fraud tied to the Hope Forward initiative? It was a strange case from the start, not because of the charge itself. Politicians faced investigations all the time, but because of who was presiding. The name on the docket made jaws drop: Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Civil suits like this never fell under his authority. His bench wasn't supposed to touch this territory, yet there it was, stamped and filed as if the entire judiciary had been reshuffled overnight. That anomaly alone made whispers race through the legal world. Some called it clerical error, others a power move. To the public, it looked like a trap. Inside the courtroom, Crockett sat poised but unshaken. The room buzzed with the faint hum of cameras outside and the restless shuffling of attorneys flipping through their papers. She knew the stakes. If the allegations stuck, she wasn't just losing a lawsuit. She was losing her name, her credibility, her future in public life. The Hope Forward initiative had been her signature project, a beacon of reform meant to channel donor funds into underserved communities. If it was tainted, then so was she. Justice Thomas entered, his black robe absorbing the morning light. He wasted no time with theatrics, no indulgence of long speeches. His words came clipped, sharp, almost surgical. He declared that the evidence presented was sufficient, and without convening a trial, without opening the floor for defense, he issued a verdict. Jasmine Crockett was to pay a fine of $500 million. The air collapsed into silence. $500 million without a hearing. Even seasoned attorneys in the back exchanged looks of disbelief. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. Outside, the media firestorm erupted within seconds of the ruling. Networks ran breaking headlines in bold red banners. CROCKTT FINED $500 million in hope-forward scandal. The coverage was merciless. Commentators debated whether this was a genuine crackdown on corruption or the most blatant political ambush of the decade. On the streets, ordinary citizens shook their heads. Some muttered that it proved all politicians were the same. Others argued that Crockett had been targeted because she represented change. The split wasn't just political, it was emotional. For many, it was personal. But what no one outside the courtroom knew was that Crockett's legal team had come prepared. Beneath the table where their files sat neatly stacked was a sealed envelope, its contents so explosive that even seasoned aides hesitated to hold it. Crockett's attorney glanced at her, awaiting the signal. She gave the faintest nod. The counterattack was about to begin. The sealed envelope slid across the polished oak table like a secret being smuggled into history. Crockett's attorney rose, his voice calm but carrying a sharpened edge, and requested the court's permission to introduce new evidence. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Even Justice Thomas narrowed his gaze, as though sensing the ground beneath him was about to shift. When the seal was broken, the truth spilled out in black and white. Inside was an internal Department of Justice audit report, its language dry and technical, but its meaning devastating. The supposed financial irregularities tied to the Hope Forward initiative were not evidence of fraud at all. They were the result of a glitch in third-party software that handled donor contributions. The error was systemic, affecting multiple programs, and had been flagged months earlier. Crockett had no hand in it. Murmurs rose from the benches, echoing against the high ceilings. The narrative that had been broadcast across headlines just hours earlier began to crumble in real time. But the attorney wasn't finished. He produced a second document, thinner, almost fragile, an internal DOJ email chain. Unlike the clinical audit report, this one seethed with intent. The words revealed a coordinated plan, not to pursue justice, but to neutralize Jasmine Crockett before the midterms. And the emails were explicit. Using Clarence Thomas's authority would give the ruling teeth. The effect was immediate. Reporters who had managed to sneak devices into the courtroom began typing frantically, fingers flying over screens as though racing against the truth itself. By the time the gallery was dismissed, snippets of the damning emails were already leaking online. Outside, the story detonated. News outlets shifted gears with whiplash speed. Secret DOJ operation exposed. Thomas' name used in political plot. Commentators who had condemned Crockett only hours earlier were suddenly recalibrating, hedging, or outright apologizing. Social feeds filled with outrage. Protesters gathered on courthouse steps, their chants booming against the walls. Justice, not ambush. Inside, Justice Thomas faced the documents in silence. For years he had weathered storms of criticism, but this moment was different. The very foundation of his authority had been hijacked, his name weaponized without consent. Slowly, he rose and delivered words no one had expected. The $500 million judgment was vacated. The ruling, he said, was unjustified, procedurally compromised, and illegally unsound. He went further still, authorizing a formal judicial inquiry into the DOJ's conduct. His voice carried a rare fury as he concluded, "My bench was used to launder a lie." The declaration rippled outward, through the courtroom, through the Capitol, through every screen broadcasting the moment live. Jasmine Crockett, once painted as the villain of a donor fraud scandal, now stood revealed as its target, the hero who had faced the ambush and struck back with truth. But the reckoning had only begun. The first crack in the dam came as a whisper. A low-quality audio file surfaced on social media late at night, too grainy to be taken seriously at first. But as journalists authenticated the voices, the whisper became a thunderclap. It was a leaked recording of senior DOJ officials laughing, scheming, and laying out their plan to cripple Jasmine Crockett before the midterms. Their words were cruel, casual, and unmistakable. "She's a problem. Use Thomas's name. It'll give the ruling teeth." By sunrise, the clip had gone viral. It blared from car radios, dominated breakfast tables, and looped endlessly on cable news. The outrage was instant and bipartisan. Ordinary citizens poured into the streets with hand-painted signs, chanting under courthouse windows. Crowds grew so vast that highways in and out of Washington clogged with protesters demanding accountability. Commentators who had once dismissed Crockett as reckless now described her as the most wronged politician of the decade. Congress could not ignore the uproar. In a move so rare it stunned even the cynics, lawmakers voted unanimously to authorize public hearings into DOJ misconduct. The chamber erupted not in partisan bickering, but in something stranger, consensus. It was as though the scandal had torn down the usual barricades and left only raw, shared anger in its place. When Crockett stepped to the podium days later, she did not look triumphant. Her voice was steady, almost restrained, as she unveiled a draft of the Transparent Justice Act. The bill was direct and uncompromising: mandatory disclosure of exculpatory evidence, penalties for political weaponization of the judiciary, and the creation of an independent oversight council. It was the kind of legislation that spoke not of revenge, but of repair. The act passed swiftly, fueled by the same outrage that had once threatened to destroy her. Yet when the cameras sought her out, Crockett declined the circuit of victory laps. She refused late-night interviews, magazine covers, and network specials. Instead, she boarded a series of modest buses and traveled town to town, listening to the stories of ordinary people ground down by a system that had nearly consumed her as well. In community centers and church basements, she filled notebooks with testimonies: families bankrupted by false charges, activists silenced by frivolous lawsuits, veterans fighting red tape for years. Those notes became evidence she submitted to the very oversight council her bill had created, transforming private suffering into public accountability. Her quiet refusal to bask in celebrity became her legacy. While others chased spotlight and applause, Crockett chose the slower, harder path of listening and building. She became not just the woman who survived an ambush, but the leader who turned a crooked path into the foundation of reform. And so the story ended not with a roar, but with a quiet revolution. One woman stood against the machine, exposed its gears, and forced it to change. In a nation addicted to spectacle, Jasmine Crockett became something rarer, an inspiration grounded not in image, but in truth.